Good morning to everybody. Welcome to the 25th. Can you believe we're in the 25th engagement already? And that it's September, and I'm hoping you have a wonderful day wherever you are. And it's a privilege to share with you the next few minutes in which we unpack some things related to research and specifically research designs. I hope that we can trigger some interesting thoughts and that you'll be inspired when this session ends. So let's look at what is the goal of today's workshop. I'm quickly going to go through the basics of the research design. I'm not going to spend too much time because by now you've got the basics down, but let's just remind ourselves of the basics. Because after all, we called our workshop Advanced Research Design. So then we're going to deal with that question, what is an advanced research design? Why do we need an advanced research design? What does it mean? And then I'm going to throw out some innovations in the advanced research designs that currently are in all the methodology books and probably in most of the readings that you've encountered. And there are three things I'm going to touch upon. The first is the turn to visual methodology, or to bringing visual representations into our research. The second is the participatory inclusive designs, and that spills over into decolonial methods. So we're going to touch on that a little bit. And then the third one is the so-called new materialism. And you will see these new turns in methodologies actually speaks to one another. They influence one another. They bounce off one another to spur us as researchers into new ways of knowledge creation and knowledge sharing. And then I'm going to say, but what is a winning research design, especially given the fact that you are in the M or in the D, you are developing researchers. What wins as a research design, and where will we have problems where we can make them a little bit stronger or more easy to follow so that they become the anchors for our research that they're meant to be. So let us pause first and take stock of where we are. 25 workshops, wow. So where are we in this series of workshops? I'm not repeating all the basic steps of research today. Am I busy with an innovation fetish? Do we always just want new things? No, well, maybe I'm going to introduce you to some wild new research designs today, a little bit later in this presentation after we've dealt with the basics. But I also feel that as somebody who's teaching and learning in this space, I learn new methodologies. I don't just remember the ones that I did all those many years back when I was a student. There are new ones emerging and they excite me, and I read in them and I try them out myself. And that is my responsibility and my pleasure to also introduce you to the new stuff that I'm reading and the new things. And then I feel that you also have a commitment, because you're doing research now in 2022, where the world has changed and where you've got so many methods and ideas right at the fingertips. And as you walk amongst people and as you live your life in your communities, there is so much that you can do, that you've got a commitment to also push yourself into new research designs, new methods, creating new knowledge, co-creating it with your research participants. So as I talk, many of these ideas will become clearer. So our first goal of our workshop is, let's just revisit the basics of research design, just so that we all on the same page, singing from the same hymn book. What is a research design? So the basics of a research design is this. A research design is a strategy that justifies the logic, structure, and principles of the methodology and the methods to collect and analyze the data in terms of the stated research problems and of objectives of the study. That's a very long quotation, but it encapsulates everything that the research design is. And you will see a research design is hence a way of packaging everything that your study is about, starting from the research problem, the objectives, and then giving a strategy of how you are going to generate data or find data or co-create data to answer those stated objectives. Now, I don't know what is your favorite sports. Maybe it's soccer, maybe it's rugby, maybe it's hockey or netball. You will know that basically if you participate in any of those sports, you will need to know the rules. But what would make you win is if you can apply those rules in an innovative way. I want you to think of your research design as the same thing. There are rules to the game that we all must follow. If your thing is making pottery on a pottery wheel, we will not be throwing mud at the pottery wheel. We will be throwing clay at the pottery wheel. You will not be dancing on the pottery wheel. You will be making your pot on the pottery wheel, not so. So we understand the rules of the engagement, but we're going to be creative inside those rules. We're going to push the boundaries inside of those rules. So understand the basics and then see how your basics can speak to your research to make it innovative and fresh. So a research design determines the range of possible methodological choices in terms of the philosophy that underlies our research. And guys, those are big words in philosophy, the ontology, the epistemology, and the axiology. Some of us are very au fait with this, we know this, we understand it well. Other people, oh, what are all these words? What do they mean? Basically, philosophy is how we look at the world, how we understand the world. And in the end, if you want to understand your own philosophy, then go tonight and write down in your diary or in your notebook or in your research journal the answer to this question. Who am I as the researcher? If you answer that question well, it will unlock for you your own philosophy and how it brought you into the space of research. Who am I as a researcher? So it also asks us, what is data? How do I see things as data? It answers questions about sampling and representation, about temporality, that is, how do I work with time? Do I see time as just existing now, so I do a cross-sectional study? Or do I like to work with time in the past, the present, and the future? Or do I see these things as fluid? The past is present in the moment because of historical processes that perhaps caused inequalities. And I also use the present moment and the past to imagine a better future. That is how I work with time. And then context. And as we talk about new methodologies today, you will see that these two things really come to the fore in contemporary writing about research design and where methodology is going, how we deal with time and how we deal with context. And context is so important. You know, whether you're doing the most quantitative experiment that is very controlled, or whether you're doing the most out there, innovative, open phenomenological experiment, field experiment out there. The context is so important because the context speaks to your philosophy. You are a researcher in UNISA, in this time, in this context. So that embeddedness of who you are as a researcher. What do you bring into the research space? Where am I researching? When am I researching? What kind of better future am I envisioning? All of that is part of context and is so important today in methodology. Your research design, finally, is unique to your study. So I can't go and buy a research design or take it off a shelf and say, okay, because it worked for Lincoln and Guba, it's going to work for me. Because why? Look at that definition again. It says that it's a strategy that's unique to your problem statement and your objectives. Therefore, your research design will be different for you from what another researcher has perhaps produced. There will be similarities, but there will also be interesting differences. Why is a research design needed? Why can't we just say, oh, let me just get on with my research? Now, basically why we need a research design is that if I build a plan for how to build my house, it will probably not fall down, right? So first of all, it's to demonstrate that the research strategy will meet the requirements of evidence, and how I see evidence has got a lot to do with my philosophy, but that it will meet the requirements of evidence to answer my research objectives. In other words, the road I'm taking, the plan I'm taking, the game I'm taking to today's match will reach my objectives. So it's first of all, that's why we need a research design. Secondly, to declare that my strategy is transparent to my reader, my audience, my participants, my funders, and my gatekeepers. Because we know if we're going to negotiate consent or access to a research site or talk about how we're going to do our research, we want to declare it openly. This is what I'm trying to do. I'm not just going to let it unfold as it happens. I'm going to say, roughly, this is what I want to do. And I will sometimes let new data come to me and emerge from the situation. But roughly, this is my strategy. It is also used to rationalize the use of my time, other people's time who might participate in my study, my resources that I'm going to use. It's to rationalize and justify it. And then finally, that very important and often overlooked resource in research called trust. People have got trust in you when we start our research, whether it's your collaborators, your supervisors, the university, your family, your loved ones who are supporting you through the research. There's trust. There's trust in the researcher that they've got a plan and that they will let that plan unfold to answer the research objectives and to add to the body of knowledge. It is also needed to stake a claim as to the potential value in terms of intellectual credibility, accountability, coherence, and rigor. Now, the word rigor, we often think of rigor as rigid. That means everything needs to be on a template and there's just a box ticking. No. That's not what rigor means. Rigor means actually that I thought carefully about each step that I took in my strategy. I thought about it. I thought about its consequences. I thought about how it's going to influence my data, the outcome of my research, and I reflect on how I took those decisions and I report on it in my proposal and in my draft chapters, in my research report, in my chapter where I write about it. That's what rigor means. I understood the rules of the game and I report on how I went and implemented it. A research design also helps you to minimize bias or distortions or mistakes or unintended consequences. Those happen in every research. There are limitations, there are things that happen, but if you've got a plan, then you can foresee some of the things that might go wrong, and you can work out strategies for how to address it. And then finally, to estimate your costs as well. What should be in my research design description roughly? Usually there is a section where we talk about how my methodology is linked to the theory that I've chosen and my research problem. So it roughly starts off with my paradigmatic issues. And I'm going into paradigms a little bit more intensively just after this. It's the actual design plus why does this design fit my research problem and stated objectives? Remember, everything in the research needs to be connected. You must think of it almost as knitting a piece of cloth together or knitting a big blanket together. All the stitches need to be neatly tied together so it doesn't fall apart. So whatever I write in my research design, I justify it. This research design fits because my research problem is this and my research objectives are these. So that shows the reader that all these bits of your research fits together. So usually there's also issues of conceptualization and operationalization of some of my variables, or they might be a hypothesis. I consider issues of measurement, my sample design, my sampling methods. I consider my data collection and fieldwork. Instrumentation is, did I use a schedule? Did I use photo voice? Did I use an experiment? What were the instruments I used to capture the data? Then how do I deal with data capturing, editing, and data analysis? I usually point out any shortcomings or errors that I can foresee. And I consider my strengths. So I don't just shoot down my research design. I also consider what are the strengths that all these bits brings to answering my research objectives. And usually I declare any ethical issues related to the study and its execution. And then we can also add a budget. It's nice to add a budget in your research design because it again shows the reader that you thought about the steps and what the resource needs of your steps will be. I said I'll talk about paradigmatic issues. So what is a research paradigm? A paradigm is a philosophical stance, a viewed worldview. It consists of beliefs, assumptions, concepts, and values that inform you as the researcher's view of reality, what counts as knowledge, and ways of knowing that guides my research priorities, my choices, and my actions. So let's unpack these. Let's see what they mean. So the philosophy of research. A paradigm is said to have an ontology, an epistemology, an axiology, and a methodology. And they fit together in the rules of my game. So ontology is, what is reality? What is social reality? What is physical reality? What is human nature? What exists? What is there to be known out there? What is true? What are truth claims? That's my ontology. How do I see the world? Do I see it as existing as separate from me? That it is an objective reality, and whether you observe it or I observe it, we will observe it in the same way? Or do I see it as something that we create? We create meaning, and every time I observe, it's different. So it's those questions that goes into my ontology. Then I get my epistemology. It follows on my ontology, and it says, okay, given that I view reality in a certain way, what then counts as knowledge or truth claims? Who is the knower? Who knows? How do I know? And what are the limits of human knowledge? And those of you reading in the decoloniality of methods would have seen the word epistemicide quite a bit. That means the killing of knowledge systems by not acknowledging them. That's from De Sousa dos Santos. Axiology follows from my ontology and my epistemology. Given all of this, what is the reality and what is knowledge? What do you value? What do you as the researcher value? Do you think that value should be outside of the research? It should not contaminate the research? Or do you think my values enrich what I do? Do you think I cannot take off my values that like I would take off a coat and hang it in the hallway? It's always with me. Or am I value committed? Perhaps value committed towards transformation and uplifting people who are living in an unequal society. Is there perhaps a value commitment? Or in feminist research, a value commitment to addressing patriarchal difference? And how does this affect my research and my findings? So axiology basically is also about your ethics. And then methodology is how do we discover, create, and share knowledge? And a winning research design ties all four interdependent elements together. So the research design, I said it's a package. It's a package where I understand the rules of the game. So let's look at these. We have in the first column the purposes and aims of my study. So I go back to my research purpose, my aims, my objectives. And my design is my strategy. What am I trying to achieve? Which approach will best meet the aims of my study? So can you see how your research design is absolutely in service of your research objectives? I know students sometimes think, especially those in the social sciences, oh no, I'm really scared of numbers and statistics. So I'm just going to say I'm doing qualitative research and get all of that behind me. But can you see it is the wrong strategy? The strategy is which approach will best meet the aims of my study. And then I can go and ask, is my study descriptive, exploratory, explanatory, emancipatory, evaluative? Those are just words. Studies can be all of that or none of that. It's up to you. And then based on that, I decide which strategies for data collection would work the best. But in that design is also my philosophy, then my methods, then my analysis, then my evaluation. Evaluation is usually that part of the research design or the research proposal where they say to you, how will you ensure rigor of the findings? How will you ensure that the findings are reliable and valid? So that is the evaluation part of it. Then the ethics, how will people's rights be protected? And the outcomes, what will be the end products of my research? Will it be a thesis, the recommendations, and so on? So let's take this package and see how it plays out in particular orientations. Some typical research designs, if you look at entry-level methodology books, will say to you there are things such as experiments and cross-sectional research designs, longitudinal research designs, case studies, comparative research designs, and many of the methodology books would go and tell you there's only those. Those in orange are the only ones out there. Now, I beg to differ. I think they're a bit outdated There are many other research designs. There's also the mixed methods one, where intersectionality is used as a paradigm, where you've got quantitative or qualitative, nested or sequential designs. There's a turn towards the visual and online methods. And there's also the new materialist and post method kinds of research designs, where we strive to decolonize the method and problematize this template type approach to research designs, where we allow for things such as chaos modeling when we're quantitative, and qualitative, the more biographical reflective work. And I will give you a few teasers for these methods later on. Another way to depict your research design is called the research onion, and I've got the references for you at the end of the slide. You can go and look at them. Some students like presenting this in a very visual way, to say where you fit into this research onion, and the reason why it is called an onion. If you slice through an onion, it's got layers like that, and at the core is certain things, and so it goes on, but the one influences the other one. So you can also present it in this visual way for yourself, if that helps, so that you can see how the different layers fit together and make one coherent onion. So it's also a way of thinking about it. You can copy this slide and write all over it, and see how the bits of your research design fits together in all these orientations. So here's a typical quantitative research design, and it would, at this design strategy, say which quantitative approach best meets the aim, and your philosophy will be positivism or post-positivism. Your methods will be very straightforward. Your analysis will be how you would do your inferential and basic statistics. Your evaluation would be the usual measures of validity and reliability, perhaps added to it the veracity of the findings. The ethics would again be the same. So this is how a quantitative research design will be packaged roughly. Typical qualitative one, your philosophy would instead be something like idealism or social constructionism or phenomenology or feminism. There are many kinds of philosophies inside of qualitative designs, and your evaluations will just be a little bit different, where you check for trustworthiness, credibility, transferability, dependability, confirmability, and so on. We dealt with these when we discussed qualitative designs. Next methods, your philosophy is often pragmatism, although there are many other philosophies such as realism that also underline mixed method. Just go make sure that when you're going mixed method, that you understand which philosophies, which ontologies, epistemologies, and axiologies actually speak to them. Your methods are often that you've got a very fixed design, sequential, parallel, concurrent, and nested. Go and read up, understand which methods you will use. Understand that the mixed methods, they're very popular today. They're very well used, but they are time consuming. They are a bit more expensive. And that there are typologies for them. There is a journal called the Journal of Mixed Methods. There are lovely books out there. They are in our library that you can go and find out how to do your mixed methods. So you see, each time my orientation changed, how I package the rule of the game is a bit different, but it always ties back to the purpose and aims of my study. So those were the basics. But our goal today is to think beyond the basics, because we're looking at advanced research designs. So what is an advanced research design? It is one that features that has the features, as we discussed now, on the basics, but it adds something more. It innovates because it locates itself in contemporary debates about the ontology, the epistemology, the axiology, and the methodology that speaks to your research problem. So it takes the call to research praxis seriously. What does praxis mean in research or in engaged scholarship? Praxis means that I'm thinking about what does my research add? And maybe right now you're thinking, all my research is going to add is it's going to bestow a degree on me, or it's going to get me published. But because we are working in 2022, where resources are scarce, where people are struggling, my research endeavor praxis ask of me to create useful research, research that answers the call for us to be responsible, engaged scholars. So it adheres to the highest standards of ethics as well. A research design for our times is an advanced research design, where you want to be up to date. You want to be part there of the scholars doing exciting and new work. So it resists preset research assemblages, pre-packaged methods. And colleagues, I know that we're in this machinery and bureaucracy of how we package research within an institution. And that often we feel as though we're just filling in forms and adhering to templates and box ticking. But I don't think that we can solve the world's problems if we stay happy with box ticking and doing the same things in the same way. I think that COVID, that inequality, that interpersonal violence and sadness in this world, as well as climate change, and also the possibilities that resides in young people, young upcoming researchers, new researchers, not only the negative, but also the positive, makes it possible for us to, within these templates and in these forms that we fill out and in the box ticking that happens in the ethics reviews committees and the people adjudicating our work, we can still innovate and push against the grain and come up with new things. So let me tell you a silly joke. You know, there was this guy who was standing outside a restaurant, and he was a little bit, what will I say? He was intoxicated. He had a little bit too much beer to drink. And he was searching on the ground. And a good Samaritan comes by and says, "How can I help you?" He says, "I've lost my car keys." And the guy says, "Okay, let me help you." And they're searching, and they're searching, and they're searching. And after a few minutes, the Samaritan's patience also runs out, and he says, "Okay, but we can't find it anywhere here. Where do you think it was lost? Why should we not search a little bit further?" And the guy says, "No, I'm searching here under the street lamp because I've got light here. I don't have light where I've lost it." Now, can you see, if we just keep on doing research in the same way, we are searching like this man just under where the lamplight is and not in the darker corners where the light hasn't been shone for a while. So a research design for our time is forward-looking. It sees research as agency and a potential to be unleashed. There are no isolated fortresses of righteousness where I say, oh, qualitative is so much better than quantitative because positivism was so bad, or that, you say, okay, if I can't measure things, they don't exist, and this is just iffy business, so let's just do quantitative. There are no rights and wrongs in research designs. Everything is given unto us. Not everything is good. So I need to go and understand the rules of the game and understand how they will work for my research, for my praxis, for who I am as a researcher. So it is informing, it's informative. Information tells you something. If I'm asking for information, I'm asking people to enlighten me, to give me something, to help me to take the next step, instead of writing in forms again. Okay, so see what are in the templates and also make your case strong enough that you want to go outside of the boxes if you can. A research design for our time is rhizomatic research. That means a rhizome is, if you think of a plant growing under the topsoil, a rhizome means that it's making one part of a plant and then shooting out and making another part of it. So that is what rhizomatic is. It's also called bricolage or a free search for ideas. So it means that the following things exist in a winning research design. It is embodied, it is located, it starts from where you are, and then nomadically you travel through your data. But first of all, you need to answer that question: who am I as a researcher? Where am I located currently? What are the problems that I am seeing? The different future that I'm envisioning that I want to get to. The kind of research listens and connects stories. There are assemblages of observations that are intentionally for grounding the praxis issues of equality, respect, and being present in the moment. It is embedded, it's on a plane of immanence. Immanence means it emerges, it becomes. As I travel through my research, I create data that wasn't there before. I'm creating. Things come to me. I see difference as something positive, not something negative, and there's a commitment to seeing this journey through to its end. I'm sensitive to things and people who do not fit the status quo. It's often spoken about as deterritorialization. So often students now start thinking of alternatives to in-person data collection now that we are free to meet people again. We are not in lockdowns. People go back to in-person data collections, but in the meantime, a lot of non-in-person data collection also came to the fore because we live so much of our lives on the internet. There are things called nethnographies that combines ethnographies with the internet. So if you're interested in that, you can all have a look at that. You may be forced to consider alternatives to in-person qualitative interviewing sometimes because of budgetary constraints or because you can't travel. But think critically about online spaces and telephonic interviews. They exist in our modern day. They are there to be used as data collection points or strategies, but think critically about the pros and cons. Your research participants are not physically present, and hence you lose a lot of contextual observation. So there are possibilities for digital data collection that you can use in combination with in-person, such as telephonic interviews, but they're very difficult to record sometimes, and people do not always want to. It can be expensive for people. There's instant messaging interviews, emailed questionnaires can often be used, online blogs, or video conference interviews. There are many ethical considerations to these, that people's IP addresses are known, that confidentiality can be an issue, that privacy can be an issue. And there is a link if you want to read more about these alternatives to in-person data collection. So what do we want to do? We have to want to do innovative thinking about our research design. So I'm going to talk about the turn to the visual, participatory inclusive designs and decolonial turns, and then new materialist designs. The turn to the visual. We're living in a very visual culture, don't we? Right. Yeah, so people are using more and more visual representations of their data to enliven it. You can do a very quantitative experiment, but people would sometimes now also like to take videos of it with things such as iMovie or TikTok and so on. There's a lot of visualization of how do I engage with it. So visual methods are coming more and more to the fore, and they actually remembers that as researchers from the past, we owe a methodological debt to how invisible we made our methodologies rendered a lot of the world. We made things into data points, things and peoples and their histories, without paying due attention to context, history, or power structures. And it became an othering and making things invisible that we now want to push against. So the turn in visual in methodology turns away from the objectification and the totalizing gaze, where we just had this God's eye view on the objective social world without taking all these other things into account, and where knowing was part of extraction and possession. In other words, I extract this knowledge from the field or from people or from the soil or from the area, and I possess it as my data, and there it ends. So it's this turn in methodology to say those things were problematic and how we can do that. So one way of doing this is photo voice. It's a participatory tool. It's often used in participatory action research or community-based participatory action research. It's based on Paulo Freire's notion that the visual can be used to create critical consciousness of power and oppression. It can be used as an elicitation of photographs where you perhaps have a meeting with the community and they bring photographs to show the area, to show history, and that then leads into critical dialogue, storytelling, and creating solutions together. It's often used for marginalized groups who want to have a say in how they are seen, how they are represented, to get beyond stereotypical problem-based views, totalizing gaze of people. And why is it used? It is used where language or literacy or the power to express yourself or voicelessness are regarded as barriers. It's to foster dialogue, imagination, and solutions. The problems are the ethics of this. If you use photographs of people, you need to either have permission or pixelate faces. So be careful with that. It's easier if you ask people to draw something or to take pictures of objects. The representations needs to be problematic if we don't want to just go on representing certain communities as beriddled with problems, but also as having their own assets and value. Then we need to carefully think about our representations there. And it can be very difficult to just have visual interpretation, so we usually need to combine it or triangulate it with other techniques such as interviews or experiments or surveys and so on. The visual can mask something, but it can also constitute or reflect a particular social reality. So Margolis and Paulus has type of visual data. They say that they can be pre-existing visuals, and then there can be researcher instigated visuals. So pre-existing visual materials could be where you analyze visual cultures such as television, billboards, advertisements, movies, existing maps of an area, how maps are drawn, often showed inequalities or how we deal with boundaries. Something called the transect walk, where you as the researcher walks with the community through an area and look at spaces where people meet and create and change it. Documenting the research is a visual method. You can write, you can draw maps. You would see with mixed methods, there's a lot of diagramming taking place. So this visual turn has gone into mixed methods and has really inspired it. And then there's the researcher instigated visual, where the researcher produces it. For example, cue cards. Let's say you want to look at the typical diet of a family and you have cue cards that shows it. Or you want to analyze a problem and you use the fishbone technique where the community sits together and they draw these things. It could be part of a data generation package. It can be participant generated, where you leave it totally over to your participants. There was some interesting work done here with people doing doll making or clay modeling or quilting together or stories. Or you can have it together, the researcher and the participants doing it together in participatory mapping or diagrams, timelines, videos and video diaries. So there are loads of possibilities for a visual turn in the research design. Then we also have multi-methods, mixed methods. I know you've got your own workshops on mixed methods. They are very popular. They're very cutting edge and out there at the moment. And they are really lovely methods to use for contemporary researchers that allows you the eclectic approach, where you look at pragmatism and intersectionality as a theoretical orientation, where we say not just one identity of people determines their social reality, but multiples: your gender, your sexuality, your age, your race, your ethnicity, your linguistic abilities, and so on. So intersectionality is often used in multi-methods approaches. It has both a normative theoretical argument and a research approach. It favors praxeology, praxis. What is the use of my research? That combines practice. In other words, whatever I find in my research is going back into practice to address a policy or a recommendation or a better way of doing things. It looks at the theory, the social actor, and the institution. And it's usually a method for inclusion to create mutual knowledge in a so-called third space. In other words, the one space was the researcher, the second space was the research participants, and together we create a third space where we participate and co-create the knowledge. So there's a call towards inclusivity. What does that mean? It's this collaboration that I now spoken about. It's the participatory approaches in the third space, where the researcher and the researched generates the data together. If you want to see an example of such praxeology, there's a link there that you can go and look at how it was done. And this now moves us straight into the decoloniality of method and the seminal work by Linda T.Y. Smith on decolonial methodologies. And she asked for something called the bear approach. And she says, before I start my study, I reflect on the following questions. Whose research is it? Who owns it? Can you see immediately you think it's no longer the researcher in charge, it's also the researched or the participants that can also own it. Whose interest does it serve? That's the praxis. Who has designed the research and who will carry it out? How will the results be disseminated? What are the barriers to participation for people? Not everybody can participate. How am I going to create ways for everybody to participate? How meaningful is the participation? How flexible is my project? Who are you as a researcher? What do you carry in your spirit, in your heart, your own baggage that you bring to the problem? What can it actually do to write things right here and right now that can help us grow? In other words, the praxeology is, how useful is my data to help us learn and grow? And she says the way in which scientific research is implicated in the words excesses of colonialism remains a powerful, remembered history for many of the world's colonized people, where research was only extraction and not a co-creation and a giving back. So it asks for a new ethics that foregrounds plainly speaking, dejargonizing, the right action at the right time, self-reflection, and affect, feeling. In other words, that thing that we always thought should remain objective and value-free, we now also bring into the research. And if you want to read a little bit more of the Bear approach, there are the references. So the decolonial turn in research methodology is based on a discontentment with the following things: research practices that harmed indigenous populations because the data was extracted and they were often misrepresented; the new colonial extraction of data and the seizure of local knowledges and natural resources under the banner of scientific investigation, progress, and development; the idea that the researcher owns all the capital as the best knower, the expert, where the research is to be known. There are only data points, there are only statistical points, they do not exist beyond that. And the idea that knowledge is property, that knowledge can be appropriated, that the transformation of knowledge into knowledge products, in other words, that book that you sell, the article that gets subsidized or not, the degree that gets conferred, knowledge just for knowledge products, who owns it, controls it, who benefits from knowledge. And the perils of parachute research, where you just drop into an area or a community, collect the data, and then you disappear. And the disconnection to what happens before and after. Entering research is entering a site of trauma. We change things through research. We change them through our gaze. We represent them in a certain way. And the decolonial turn asks us to think about these things. It asks for engaged research as a different way of knowing and learning. It asks for knowledge, whose knowledge is being heard, whose voices are being heard, who defines what counts as knowledge and what is valued as knowledge. It brings in the affective dimensions, the feeling dimensions. There's a respect for embodied learning. In other words, we are human bodies who interact with one another. We are actively creating ethical relationships in the research. And there's a care for one another's vulnerability. I often get struck by our own understanding of vulnerability in our ethics templates and in our ethics policies, that we assume vulnerability only exists out there, and that our vulnerability is not also in ourselves, or that we need to render ourselves vulnerable to not just be the knower expert, but also be left open to go into an area and be changed and transformed with it. So it asks also for restorative justice, and it asks for a relation relationality beyond humans. So it says that we also have obligation to non-human persons, to the generations still to be born, to our memories of those who have gone before us, our ancestors, and to overcome the objectification of resources such as land. So there's a very specific embeddedness in it. It asks for sustained relationships that transcends the research, and a professional humility that we as the researchers are not the experts, that we need to be changed and learn from our encounters. It looks at silences and absences. It attends to the untold histories and the stories that cannot be told across or in certain times and spaces. And it asks you to ensure that you are speaking with and not on or about or speaking for the research. Here's Linda to Hawaii Smith's Bear agenda. You will see, again, she presents a research onion, but see how different it is. She says it starts off with a critical consciousness, then community capacity building, development, renewal, recovering, and the ultimate praxis of my research is hope, healing, and social justice. A decolonial research ethics, this comes from a scholar known as Kisha Supernant. She works with building and building plans, and she even brings a decolonial research into this. You would see the words dwelling in a lot. Now, if you think of embeddedness that I've spoken about, we need to consider, where am I embedded? Who am I as the researcher? Where do I fit in? This dwelling in makes sense. If I invite you to my home tonight, I'm asking you to dwell with me inside my home, to come in under my roof and share my food with me. So we're going to dwell together. We're going to stay together. And this dwelling in comes in a lot in the new research designs, and it asks for that relationality, that's dwelling in, this sitting and thinking about my research. And she says it's all about relations, and this is how she unpacks those relations. The R stands for respectful inquiry. The E is that this is equitable. It's a researcher and research on the same plane. It's a long-term commitment. There are alliances built. There's a commitment to truthfulness. I'm invested in my research. I am open to learning new things. I negotiate always throughout my whole research, and it's a mutually supportive relationships. And she says only by doing that we can create structures, overcome the structures that create divisions, and that shapes the knowledge and the collaboration. Further on in decolonial methods, they use photo voice, also ethnographies, visual methods, storytelling, mixed methods, participatory approaches. All of them are used. Everything possible is used in this turn. It foregrounds an upstream. However, that causes for social injustices are in the past, so it deals with temporality in the present, but also looks back to the past. So it looks at things such as the role of capitalism, globalization, and patriarchy and inequality, but it also looks towards a future. It's a relativist view where there are multiple socially and historically shaped realities based on multiple relationships. And there's a respectful representation and reciprocity through the relational accountability. It's often participatory. There's a liberatory methodology that's transformative. And knowledge is collective rather than individualistic, and includes the spiritual world, the dreaming, the stories, the envisioning of a different future, and the entire cosmos. And there's some readings for you to go and see how people have applied this. Now, the final innovation that we're going to get to is the turn towards materiality. And you will see how it builds on these new turns. It's an extension of the visual turn in methodology, where we used to have this binary, this difference between form and being. We move to a form of being. Now, if you think of yourself and your car, right? Your car is an object. You are you. When you sit in your car, you become you, the driver. So can you see that as we interact with material, you and I are connected right now through all the internet and the visual representations that I've given you today, and you're hearing my voice, and it's all made possible through this material world. But we're creating something new now, something that didn't exist. You and I are together in this moment, and we are talking about stuff. So that's a form of being. So it focuses on embodied experiences and material practices, science and technology. And they say things are interacting with things. Humans are interacting with things, and humans are things too, but we become different things as we interact with different things. And it has a view that matter is not static or inert or fixed or essentialist. Technology exists there, but how I use technology is different. Backdrop for my agency, it is not purely culturally constructed. So there's technology, but culture interacts with it, and how we as humans interact with it change that materiality. So this turn in methodology is open to non-traditional knowledge forms, such as memory and attachment. And it works on something called intra-action instead of interaction. Intra-action is a word that looks at the agency as not inherently a property of an individual, but a dynamic coming together of different forces. And the person who created Materiality is Karen Barad. She is a natural scientist who works on waves and works on the idea of diffraction through waves. And she has used these ideas to take it into the social sciences and the humanities as well. Intra-action conceptualizes that there is action between and not just in between that matters. In other words, it looks at how we deal with our material world and changes it, and how in that we become different social actors. It works on the words of our decolonial scholars as well. They also deal with materiality, such as Hortense Spillers and Sylvia Winter, who says that we need to reorient Western epistemology from the point of view of those who have never been regarded as human. So materiality allows or restricts who, how, and who experiences certain shapes, forms, and it also mutates spaces, material, environments, things, and physical boundaries. This particular form of methodology uses metaphors to describe the research design that was developed through the material culture, and they use words such as diffraction, affordances, plasticity, entanglement, emplacement, imbrication. So this kind of thinking underlies the visual turn, the making together, the co-creation of things. For example, let's say that you've done a phenomenology study and you have gained certain interviews, and you as the research team come together and you make it visual through using a whiteboard, for example, to capture things that people have said. And we create that materiality to now underline the contours of this phenomenon that we're trying to describe. Okay, so now I've introduced you to some wild research design. In the end, what must you take home for a winning research design? A winning research design tether the different blocks together. All of the layers of that research onion are interrelated. It is aware of the methodological developments of the time. It starts with the research problem, the topic, and the objectives. Please type those out, write them out, put them up on a wall where you can see them so that it tethers you to your research problem. It declares who you are as a researcher, your ontology, your epistemology, your axiology, plus it justifies it in terms of being suitable for the research problem and the objectives. It looks at the target site, the population, the sampling, the inclusion criteria. It looks at the data collection strategies. It looks at the ethics, the procedural one, the personal one, and the communal ones. And it looks at your issues of reliability or validity, your data analysis and interpretation, and your reporting. Don't neglect to justify your methodological choices. If you're using a new method, or what you would regard as a new method, such as mixed methods, or photo voice, visual turn methods, decoloniality, make sure you justify it and include references to show the reader that these are established ways, but that you will repackage them in a new and innovative way. Practice engaged scholarship. Be present in your research. Do not let your research become this chore. I don't like it when my M&D students say to me, I just need to get through this. No, you need to be present. You need to be enjoying this. You need to be going for this. It needs to be the fire in your belly. It needs to really inspire you. If you're no longer inspired by your research, try and do something different with it. Try and draw a picture about it. Try and visualize it. Try speaking to other people about it. Find like-minded people to help you to practice engaged scholarships. Stay on course. Think of yourself as driving this road. There's no weaving out in and out of traffic with your lovely new BMW. You will get hurt. There's no giving up. You've committed to this. So stay the course, stay motivated, get positive people around you to motivate you. Read a lot to get yourself out with the vocabulary of your field. Underline those key notions that come up time and again in the people that you read so that you can use this vocab, own it for yourself, and expand it and even create your own vocab. Deliver on your promises because you live beyond your degree or your publication. So if you promise that your praxis would be to go and give back to the community or the people, please do so. Be you and be ethical. And you would see my little bee there. And the bee collects pollen from flowers without exploiting them. And it connects flower to flower through pollination, so that in the end, life itself continues. See your journey through your degree as that you collect a bit of pollen from all the flowers, the books you've read, the people who inspire you, your supervisors, this amazing team at CGS, and that you will carry all of that together and create something new through your own research. Most of all, enjoy your research. May courage weave its strong web over our wounds May joy surprise us as we shake off sleep in the morning light. May we find each other and the path to a home that we never knew. May we paint our lives in the colors of laughter, and may we know that our survival is a blessing. There are references that you can go and read a little bit more. That came up in the various slides. Most of these are in our library. Your amazing research librarians for your disciplines will be able, your personal librarians, to find these for you. If you still struggle, I exist. I'm always interested in new research. You're welcome to ask me. Finally, I thank you for your time, for listening to these presentations, and I wish you so much luck in your journey. Own your research, create, praxis, be respectful and engaged, and enjoy this. And I'm going to now go back to Tony. Thanks.